Thanks all for coming. I'll do a quick autobiography. My name is NinjaTurtle. I've been playing Eve since 2004 on that character, a little bit before on some others. I've done most of what there is to do, or at least have a little taste. High sec, low sec, null sec, mercenary work, wormholes. So I've seen a lot. I've seen a lot of changes to the game. But there's really one commonality that exists between them all. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. It's really that the strength of your information is as important, if not more important, than the strength of your fleet. And that's something that you'll see in most any endeavor in Eve. If your information isn't correct, or if you lack the proper information, it oftentimes doesn't really matter what you bring or how many people you bring. You're either in the wrong spot, you're doing the wrong thing at the wrong time, and it's not something that really works out. So we're kind of going to take a look at the way that data exists within the client, how we access it, how we get at it, the problems that exist when we try to access this data. Secondly, we're going to look at third-party applications, how these applications overcome these issues mostly. Nothing's perfect, right? But a lot of these things are really helpful and, in the end, essential, actually, to what we need to do with this information. And then finally, we're going to take a look at, sorry, I'm actually not even paying attention to my slides. Finally, we're going to take a look at, I call it intensive consumption, because the first two things really deal more with empirical data, numbers, statistics, things that are finite, objective, somewhat easily accessible. There exists a whole other realm to this meta information that encompasses things that go deeper than that. They may use empirical data, but they draw conclusions, subjective opinions, things like that. So blogs, podcasts, news sites, social media interactions are definitely very important to that too. So that's kind of just an overview of what we're actually going to go for. So let's set up a little example here. Probably everybody's done this at least once if you played the game. So say I have some medium autocannons, and I want to figure out what type of ammo to use. Well, if I was doing it in client, this is how it would look. I have the big 8 Tech 1 types of ammo here. Each one of these windows had to be opened. Thankfully, we have market groups, right? We didn't have to search for all one of these. So we have market groups. We can open all these, but the windows, they need to be resized. They need to be moved. And the other thing you'll notice is that they're filled with a lot of noise, things we don't need. If we're interested in the damage types that they do, we don't need to know that, what the volume of the ammo is, what the charge size is, that it works with a projectile weapon. These are things we already know. When we're accessing certain tidbits of information that we want, if we go through the client, we're paying a cost of access. It's an economic cost that you pay every time you access that data, and you're primarily paying it through time. And that's something that you don't necessarily want to do because, you might not remember this by heart, and every time you need to go back to this information, you pay this exact same cost every time you go back, and a lot of busy work, a lot of stupid stuff, ancillary noise that we just don't need. So this is probably the most readily apparent issue with accessing data in the client, something that I'm sure you've all seen, is that the client really goes out of its way to disjoint and obfuscate the data. It's disjointed. We needed 8 different windows to get this little bit of information that we needed. It's obfuscated because it's got a lot of noise in there that we don't necessarily need. And this is really kind of points to like the lack of an encyclopedia reference within the client to minimize that cost of access for the information. So it's not a choice that you want to make every time you get a little bit of information. And so yeah, that's one of the biggest problems that exists when you access data within the client. So I slid these two in together because I kind of wanted to separate them, but in the end, they felt like they were really hooked together too hard. And the other thing I want to point out before I get into these too far is that the first one is really an issue of client design. There's no laws that told them how to write the client, how to display the information. That's client design. The second two are really just kind of inherent to the data in Eve. Eve is a massive universe with a lot of things in it, a lot of people in it, a lot of things going on. I mean, what was it, 50-some gigabytes of raw logs per day we heard in the keynote? And that's an insane amount of information. That information is huge in volume, and it's constantly changing in nature. And these problems really go hand in hand when we try to track this data. And a really good example, if you played Eve back like circa 2007-ish, this is what you would see for a sovereignty map. So all these lines drawn by hand, all this data crunched by hand, the power blocks thought by a person. The amount of work that this represents is insane. Like, it's incomprehensible, the amount of work that this encompasses. It's just so much data to go through. It's too much. But this is what we had to do. This is how we had to sort through the data and get at it. And this is what I'm saying when I say that just the design of the data itself is large in nature, constantly changing. And so, I mean, this is kind of just where it's at. So it doesn't present any ease in use. It doesn't present any ease in creation. And it's difficult. It's difficult to handle with. So these are all issues that exist. Third parties have kind of stepped in a way, to really help us fill the void in terms of how we handle this. So how do they do this? And this seems really wordy, right? Aggregating and fusing data into meaningful models. I mean, what does that even mean? When we take the data, we look at what we need exactly. We filter out the noise, and we put it into a view that makes it easy for us and quick for us to get the information we need. And this is what I mean. So I pulled this off of Eve's wiki, or evewiki.net. This is the same exact information I showed you in the slide before with the projectile ammos, but we've done two things. We've made it a singular view. We no longer have 8 windows we have to go through. We have all the information we need in one bit. We've also filtered out all the noise, all the access information that we really don't need. We've taken that out. It's more effective. You're not paying the cost of time of access. And it's a lot easier to get to, frankly, because you could just bookmark this URL, and anytime you needed to hop back, just boom, hit your bookmarks. So it's really the more efficient way to do it. So the second thing that third parties do is they utilize automation tools. Well, the automation tools that are available, API for now, and more importantly, coming up, Crest. They use those tools to reduce the amount of human work that you need to do, which is an important facet of it. And a good example of this, I'm sure most people probably recognize what this is. This is the varied influence map. And I'm going to explain to you a little bit how it's different from the first map we saw. First off, all the data is ran through by an algorithm, not by hand. All the sovereignty blobs, the little lines and colors you see, are all generated by an algorithm, not by hand. And why is this important? Because, you know, sifting data by hand, it's not really a big deal. It's just a lot of work, it's a lot of time, but if you don't mind that, whatever. Well, the biggest issue when we go through data by hand is that we come into a subjective bias. And this is true for most things that you'll deal with. The human brain isn't really wired to go through situations, deal with data in a perfectly impartial way. I mean, you're wired to work off your memories, what you know, and it's just how it is. It's human nature. So by putting all this into an algorithm, removing human interaction from it, we have made this extremely easy to use and extremely objective as well. So the third thing that third-party apps really help us do is to filter out the noise. There's so much noise in this game when it comes to information. We use third-party apps to optimize our access time, like the first example, using a third-party app to get at that projectile ammo info instead of having to go through all of that. And we also use it to reduce mental overhead, which the example that came to my mind specifically was EFT and PIFA. There's a lot of math involved when it comes to fitting ships. There's a lot of mental overhead when it comes to that kind of stuff. Those kind of applications really reduce the amount that you have to think by doing the calculations for you, doing the mental work for you, and then presenting you with data in a view that is easy to understand, to read, and to, most importantly, to recreate and to save. So yeah, I mean, access time is really one of the biggest costs you're going to pay when you start getting into information like that. So digging deeper. So I didn't really know, I guess, how to present this section. My original proposal for a talk was I wanted to do something on podcasting because that's what I do. I've been co-host of Declarations of War podcast since 2012, and I really enjoy the social aspect of it. And I was doing this presentation for weeks before I got here, and I couldn't figure out how to do it. And then I got here, and you get here and you get this feeling, right? It's like the socialness of it all, and being with people and having like what corp and alliance you're in, having those boundaries just kind of disappear and really being able to connect with people. And I think that is probably one of the most missed parts of meta information, is that when people say meta, they're usually thinking of like, metagame and, what's hot in the stats right now, what ship is going to be best, what doctrines are going to be best against who we're fighting, these kind of things. These are kind of empirical things. And I think often we forget how important human relationships are in this game sometimes. And it's kind of easy because, we get in our own world and we get stuck doing what we're doing. And we don't, a lot of times we don't think that there's, another person behind that avatar, right? So when I got here, I kind of started to realize this, and that the social interaction of it is really, really important. And just simply speaking from the fact of empirical data, if all you did was look at numbers all day, you have a really narrow viewpoint of what you're doing in your life. Empirical data is typically limited to what you are interested in. If you're mining, you're probably not going to care about kill counts in nullsec. If you're looking for fights in nullsec, you're probably not going to care about NPC kills in Empire, right? So what happens is that you end up getting stuck into a subsection of the empirical data that you're looking at, and you really kind of forget to expand your horizons into bigger things. Opposing viewpoints are really important to staying informed, that kind of thing. So again, like I said, the social interactions outside of the client are super important because they're more robust and they're more meaningful. If every social interaction you had in this game was within the chat channel, I mean, could you imagine how boring that would be? It would be awful. There would be no real human connection there. And that's one of the things that meta information really kind of gives us in a way. It gives us an excuse and a reason to make those human connections and to put our personal opinions out there, really, I think, and to form a personal opinion around empirical data rather than just regurgitating numbers, and to actually have an opinion on things. So let's just make sure I'm going on the right page here. So like I said, again, exposure to viewpoints is also essential to staying truly informed. If all you're doing is focusing on empirical data, you're never going to get anywhere. But so back to the social interaction being more robust and meaningful. It really is. Think about things like Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, even the Eve forums if you're so inclined. Blogs, podcasts, video logs, even comment sections on even comment sections on news sites, I mean, are all ways that we can extend that social interaction out of the client and into spheres of deeper meaning, really. Places that have a deeper meaning, deeper connection that can bring us closer together as people rather than just as EVE players. And I think that's a really important part of the metagame that a lot of people don't really realize, is that it makes a lot of human connections, and that's something that isn't to be taken lightly, because I mean, really, that's why we're all here, right? Like, we're here because it's a party and we transcend everything. Like, a good buddy of mine is in CFC. I'm staying with the Black Legion guy. Like, the lines all melt away. It really all just doesn't matter, and that's probably the most important part of what blogs and podcasts and social media and things like that do when we talk about them in relation to the game, is they help extend that human interaction and that human relationship. So this is just a really quick list of the most basic. I mean, I'd bet 100 mil I probably couldn't find anybody that hadn't heard of these. So it's just a really basic thing I said I was going to throw in there, and just I tried to keep it balanced in terms of for example, EFT, if I had EFT in there, represent PIFA. If I have Matani.com in there, represent EN24. These are just some good places to get started if you need references to information. So for example, Eve Central is a perfect example of how third-party sites defeat the obfuscation of data in the client. As you know, markets are all divided by region. That is a game design choice. But when we're looking for something like, say, the best price in New Eden, are you going to fly around to, 26 different regions to try and find it? Or are you going to go to somewhere where that data is aggregated and presented in a meaningful view for you? I'm guessing it's going to be the latter. So things like Eve Central do this really well. And this also highlights one of the things when I was qualifying my statement of third-party applications helping things, I said almost, right? And this is a perfect example of almost, because Eve Central doesn't pull data automatically. Eve Central relies on user submissions. It relies on the market data that your client pulls, and it scrapes the cache. So they're not perfect. Then that's kind of my point with that. But they do help. Information on players, especially. Things like corp history. All the data really on players is kind of spread out a little bit, either between like multiple tabs or things like that. So websites like EveWho will really help you kind of get at the quick information you need to do that. PvE, eSurvival, and Steve Ronikin's own Fuzzworks, awesome website, love that site. And I mean, it's really just, these are tools that I use every day. Every day I play, I'm using at least probably 3 or 4 of these just because they reduce the amount of access time I need for information. They make things so much easier, and I can boom, like that. Every one of those is bookmarked in my browser. I can, boom, just click it, and it's there. You don't have to go through the client, get through a bunch of crappy data, and fight with a archaic system of displaying this information. So, well, that's really about all I got, actually. I got about like 3 minutes for questions if anybody's got anything. Otherwise, c'est ça. Or we could just stand here awkwardly. I don't really care. Oh, easy, buddy.
I was just going to ask, can you just stick that last slide up again? Thank you very much.
Do you have this list accessible somewhere?
I do not, because CCP themselves weren't actually hosting our slideshows. But what I could do is I would be more than happy to host this whole slideshow on declarationsofwar.com for whatever perpetuity. Doesn't matter. I can tweet a link to it. I could post a link to it on the Evo forums. You could email me. You could hit me on Twitter at SCHERTT, whatever. However is easier for you to get a hold of me. I'm more than happy to make this whole slideshow accessible. So, and if CCP wants to put it on their CDN, I'm more than happy to give it to them. So. Boom it. If you got a voice, boom it.
One of the things I've often encountered with problems with using some websites is that the data is entirely done by player submissions, so there can be a lot of control data.
Well, and that is really one of the issues that goes back to how third parties third parties are not perfect, because until Crest really comes of age, we don't have a real foolproof system for just kind of getting that information in an objective way, as opposed to, like you say, with player submissions. It's an issue, yeah, and it comes down to, I guess, moderation, and which is true really of any website. It's only as good as your mods are. So, but you're completely correct. That is absolutely an issue with third parties, and it's something that Crest will really, hopefully, kind of shove off to the side, where we won't have a lot of issues of needing player submitted data and then having to, as you correctly say, go through the troll data. So, boom it, Crispy.
I really like that this game is hard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you feel that, like, as these apps become better and better, Crest comes, is it going to make the game too easy?
No, I don't think so, because really, there's no website that's going to undock your ship for you and call targets, right? Like, there's no website that's actually going to automate the gameplay for you. All you're doing is making it easier to make better informed decisions in less time. Is really what it comes down to. Is it going to make it a little bit easier as a whole? Yeah, but I don't think it really in any way would ever affect the core gameplay mechanics, because there's no automating shooting the right thing. What's up, Schwa?
Sort of kind of follow up to his question, and missing from your list is a site that pretty much every player uses every day, and that's Killboard.
Yeah, this is definitely not an extensive list. I guess I kind of just assumed Killboards would, come to mind. That's a good point.
Official CCP Killboard, and sort of piling into his question, whenever I suggest that CCP should maybe create an official Killboard, one of the concerns that comes up is, a lot of people want their kill information to be private and not get leaked. Would you personally think that CCP official Killboard would be a good or a bad thing?
So I'm all for CCP putting things into the client. Like my first example, having some sort of encyclopedia that's accessible in the client where you don't have to filter through all this noise and you can just get straight at information would be a really wonderful thing. Then on the same token, I would find it hard to convince CCP to dedicate resources to something that a third-party application already does fairly well. There's an issue that you speak to of, I want to keep my kill data private. I mean, so there's some like moral, like freedom of information arguments in there that don't really have to do with like the actual data structure of it. Personally, with what CCP is dedicating their resources to now, third parties can't do that. So if third parties can come in and fill in the void, I think it's good. Anything really that I think really anything that CCP does that a third party is going to do is going to lack a little bit of the fluidity and ingenuity that a third-party application can do, just because it's not their only project, right? It's one of a million things that they have to do, and it's not just a third party. It's not just Willari working on .lan, that kind of example. So it's a little bit of a yes and a no. It's a little bit of a mixed blessing. You would get some benefits. You would get some downsides to it. As it stands now, I mean, third parties are really just kind of rushing in to fill that space that the tide has left. So. I'm running over already, so that's got to be it, guys. But thank you for coming. Tranquility #1. Tonight's the last night. Have a party. Do it big. Thanks, guys.